What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and today we're going to be going over a Pioneer deck list that ended up winning the SCG Invitational at Roanoke this past weekend. Um, so far, people have been talking about this deck and saying it's probably the best deck for Smuggler's Copter. It's probably one of the best decks in the format because it checks Mono Green Devotion very well. So we're just going to go over, kind of go over the decisions specifically made, I would say, for this tournament and possible things that you might want to consider doing with this deck moving forward. So the main draw and one of the cards that's insanely good in this deck and really goes well with Smuggler's Copter is a Bloodsoaked Champion. Bloodsoaked Champion is a 1 mana 2/1 that can't block but can be returned to the battlefield for a black and 1 as long as you attacked with a creature this turn. The Bloodsoaked Champion doesn't care that if it's another creature besides itself that attacked this turn. So like if you attack with Bloodsoaked Champion and it gets blocked and trades in combat, then you can pay 2 to its raid ability to bring it back into play, which makes it pretty good and a really annoying card to deal with in terms of if you have Smuggler's Copter on your side, because you can crew with Bloodsoaked Champion, get in with Smuggler's Copter, and if your opponent kills Champion, then you can bring Champion back. The caveat is as long as you attacked with a creature that turn, you can bring it back. So like even if your opponent kills it in a turn, you can activate the ability to bring Bloodsoaked Champion back, which is really neat. Gutter Bones essentially plays the same role as Bloodsoaked Champion, except it's a little bit worse because essentially to get it back into play, you have to spend 3 mana and you actually have to connect or deal damage to your opponent in some way or have them to lose life. So definitely worse than Bloodsoaked Champion, but also and really bad, or it's like really good on turn 1 because it comes into play tapped. You can't crew Copter, but it's also pretty bad when this is like your one engine to get going and it can't crew Copter when it comes back into play. So kind of sucks. That's why it's only a 1 of in the deck, but still kind of worthy as that aggressive 1 mana card in your deck. Going through, there's 8 more 1-drops that this deck plays in the creatures section, which is insane. Knight of the Eben Legion, which is a card that people have seen a lot of in Standard. It can pump itself to be a 4/5, and then at the beginning of your end step, if a player lost 4 more life, you can put a counter on Knight of the Eben Legion. Gets out of hand super quickly. Has 1 point of power to crew Smuggler's Copter. Again, convenient as a 1-drop as well, and just eventually takes over the game. Your opponent can't block it very efficiently if you keep 3 mana up, because they more than likely just chump it. There's not very many creatures that just kill Knight of the Even Legion after you get an activation up, and especially if it gets a counter on it. You know, you have to, like these mono green decks, but if you're just forcing them into a racing position and being able to tempo them out by killing their mana dorks and things like that, then Knight of the Even Legion just becomes a card that is, again, in that specific matchup, almost impossible to deal with. And then just through normal gameplay, through a lot of the other decks that have been seen play in the format, Knight is a very terrible card to see from your opponent if you don't have any removal spells for it. Night Market Lookout is aggressive and cute, as in it has like an imaginary second point of power, because whenever it becomes tapped, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So this ability triggers too when you crew Smuggler's Copter, so this is a way where you can like get them to lose life. It'll also trigger the Gutter Bones as well, um, to be able to bring it back since your opponent loses life. So while you might be thinking there might be better 1-drops than Night Market Lookout does kind of everything that you want it to do. It's an aggressive creature that can get in the red zone on its own, crew Smuggler's Copter, and gives you an added bonus for crewing, and also for your 1 of Gutter Bones. Makes it a little bit better to where you don't necessarily have to attack, you just have to crew and things like that. Moving on to the only 2-drop creature, Scrapheap Scrounger. In theory, Smuggler's Copter is a 2-mana creature, but it's technically only an artifact when it comes into play. But Scrounger is another one of those annoying, like, recursive creatures. It can block as well, but it's a 2-mana 3/2, and then you can just pay 1 and a black, exile a creature from your graveyard to return to the battlefield, and it doesn't return tapped. So Kind of it plays like the role of like what Bloodsoak Champion and Gutterbones wants to be doing, except this comes into play untapped, and you don't have to worry about attacking to bring it back into play. You just have to have another creature to exile from your graveyard. Again, Crew Smuggler's Copter, you're probably sensing a theme here at this point. This deck can run your opponent over without Smuggler's Copter, and has a million different ways to Crew Smuggler's Copter. Even when your opponent thinks they kind of like blunt or stop your offense or anything like that, there's just these annoying recursive creatures that just come back and kind of like work up the chain to bring the other ones back. Rounding out the creature slot, like Murderous Rider, Hero's Downfall on with a body stapled to it, or a body with Hero's Downfall stapled to it. Whatever way you want to put it, this is just a removal spell, or I guess additional removal for this deck. And also is a 2/3, which has a nice body, lifelink, to be able to gain some life, to hopefully draw more cards with Castle Lochthwain and the likes. Just a really good card in general. And then Rankle, Master of Pranks, just kind of a really good aggressive creature. It has haste for whatever reason in mono black, if you can believe it. Um, More than likely is going to hit your opponent at least once, so like making them sacrifice a creature or discard a card, anything like that, to kind of just like, you discard a land, they end up discarding a spell. You guys sacrifice a creature, you sacrifice your Bloodsoak Champion after it gets in damage, and then you pay 2 mana and bring it right back. You know, just it does a lot of what this deck wants to do. It functions as a removal spell, it functions as card advantage, and it functions as card, I would say card disadvantage for your opponent. Even though it does do it to you too, like normally most of the time when you're choosing that mode, the card that you're forcing your opponent to discard, or the card that they could discard, is more than likely either at the same level or in theory better than the card you're discarding. So usually when you pick that mode, it's going to be a win. Obviously, sacrificing a creature when Rankle's your only creature is really bad, etc., so on and so forth. This card is really good, and it's not. I'm not gonna say busted, but it's definitely like up there in terms of things you can be doing at 4 mana. Um, so some of the other spells, like we talked about Smuggler's Copter to death. The reason why it's so good is because it's 2 mana. It gets crewed by a 1-power creature, and whenever it attacks or blocks, you draw and discard a card. You loot, if you will. Just card's great. People think it'll probably get banned. I think it's still okay considering the amount of removal we have in the format and the amount of instant speed removal. If there's a deck that can really just abuse Smuggler's Copter and really just make it impossible for players to like really win, then sure, you could see banning it. I don't think Smuggler's Copter is going to get banned. I think from the time when it came out, it was definitely really pushed and it was really powerful. I think in this format, while still a pushed card, ends up not being as good when we have a ton of instant speed removal and tons and tons of effective artifact removal as well. So the other spells, Fatal Push, Thoughtseize. In the mirror, Fatal Push is obviously insane because it kills literally like 90% of the creatures. I don't know about like an exact like total number of creatures, but like Unrevolted, like it kills like 80%, and then Revolted, if you can manage that, kills literally everything. Thoughtseize, also just a catch-all discard spell. Can take your opponent off of like their game plan. Like you could take their Smuggler's Copter, you could take their removal spells, you can take away their Supreme Verdicts or their Wrath effects or anything like that, to just really kind of flood the board with your dorks and just beat your opponent to death and really just kind of like tempo them out, if you will. For the mana base, they're playing 24 lands. 4 Castle Lochthwain is like your way to draw extra cards. Comes into play untapped. I'm gonna say like the majority of the time. Like I don't know how many hands. You probably end up with a decent amount of hands that are like Castle Lochthwain, Mutavault, which are kind of awkward. But most of the time, you're probably with like one swap, a Lochthwain, and a Mutavault. Like those hands are really good. Those are really keepable. Yeah, 15 swamps. Urborg being an honorary swamp that turns your other lands into swamps. So if you're stuck with like Mutavault, Mutavault now taps for colored mana, then comes into play untapped because of Castle Lochthwain. Those sort of things There's those little interactions to keep in mind if you decide to pick up the deck and play it as well. Um, let's see here, the sideboard. I'm going to assume that the sideboard was built specifically for the invitational itself and what they were expecting. So like Legion's End and Collective Brutality, I'm going to assume were for the mirror matches, and the other aggro based decks like mono red or mono white. Legion's End just very powerful, gets you information, possibly 2-for-1 to your opponent, either by exiling multiple creatures on the battlefield or exiling a creature from the battlefield and from your opponent's hand, those sort of things. Collective Brutality, just the super powerful modal discard spell that also acts as a removal spell and can essentially swing a race, a way to trigger life loss to get your gutter bones back and things like that. Also can gain you life, maybe it equals 1 or 2 more draws with Castle Lockdwain. You know, just a very powerful, very modal card that we could probably have its own video on about all the useful scenarios for Collective Brutality. Also a good way to ditch some pretty useless cards. A 1-up Duress, you're already playing 4 Thoughtseize. Depending on like how your local meta looks, you could play more Duress over Thoughtseizes as not only a budget option, but a just like a strictly better card, or I guess strictly better in those scenarios where you don't lose 2 life. Duress hits all the important cards that your opponent could be playing, and obviously it's about $100 cheaper to get a playset of Duresses over a playset of Thoughtseizes. So Duress definitely a if you have the Thoughtseizes, play the Thoughtseizes. If you need a card that's different, or a card that acts like a Thoughtseize, Duress is a totally fine card to be playing in place of Thoughtseize. There's a bunch of other ones like Harsh Scrutiny and things like that, but I don't think those ones are nearly as good as Duress. So definitely, if your meta is control or mid-rangey, or I guess more control, like combo based, like Duress is a better card. Like maybe if there's a bunch of people like slamming mid-range decks or aggro decks into each other, Harsh Scrutiny would be a little bit better, but that's ultimately a call that will be up to you if you decide to build this deck. Noxious Grasp, a card that we've seen a lot of in Standard. Destroys a creature or planeswalker that's green or white, you gain a life. Um, kind of wish that, like, you honestly wish that this card was like in that you'd bring in against Burr. Of course, you bring in Brutality, but like just being able to tempo your opponent by killing a creature, gaining a life, that sort of thing. This kills Oko really well. Kills Teferis. A card that you definitely at least want to consider when bringing in against control decks because they make you sad. Kalidas, Trader of Get, graveyard decks. I'm also going to say for the mirror, because if you just have this card in play and you're able to, like, your opponent just wants to like abuse killing creatures and whatnot to get some sort of advantage, Kalidas just exiles them. You get zombies, and then eventually Kalidas gets bigger as well by sacrificing a zombie or vampire. And I know uh, Knight of Even Legion is a vampire. Like in theory, you could sacrifice this card. Um, you could sacrifice that card or Murderous Rider to the Kalidas. Probably not the best idea, I would say, unless you're really trying to push damage or you really need to gain some life. Then sure, that is a technically a legal play that you can make, that sort of thing. But definitely a card that you want to bring in against the aggressive matchups. Mono red, the mirror, get those precious zombies, help pad your life total, all that stuff. And then for Leyline of Void, more graveyard decks. You definitely don't want to get blown out by them. Like, this is just a free card to put into play. If you want to play more budget, there is Tormod's Crypt that is legal in the format, which essentially can do the same thing. As far as like what kind of thing you would need, like I think Leyline of the Void is better when you're playing Grey Merchant, because it's a way to get 2 free devotion onto the battlefield on turn 0. Versus Tormod's Crypt, where obviously it gives you no devotion, but the upside of being way, well, not way cheaper, I guess like $33, $32 at the minimum cheaper than ley lines. So definitely something that would be considered a budget option if you choose to make any sort of changes to this deck. And that's going to wrap it up for this deck tech of Mono Black. My thoughts, I don't really see any cards in this deck that could get banned, like Smuggler's Copter is probably the closest one that could see a ban, and I think it's a perfectly fine Magic card. Like, it's, again, like, this is a very powerful card. I'm not underestimating what this card can or can't do, things like that. It's it's just not so much more powerful than cards like Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise, two cards I also think aren't going to be banned. I think are fine in the format. Like, I think those are cards that are like that do something powerful that can live in the format because there is other more, not more powerful things, but there's other powerful things you could be doing in the format as well. And you're either in the camp of playing Smuggler's Copter, or you're in the camp of like playing Dig Through Time or playing like Field of the Dead, things like that. Uh, Overall, Smuggler's Copter's fine. I think this deck is fine to build into, because even if Smuggler's Copter gets banned, this kind of all this stuff like kind of slots into the Black Devotion decks, which are also very powerful and can go over the top with Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and can draw cards with Underworld Connections, things like that. Just kind of a more mid-rangey black deck, while this is definitely on the side of like get to the red zone as fast as possible and then try to push through those last points of damage before your opponent can truly stabilize on the board. Now that will actually wrap it up for this deck tech of Mono Black Aggro for Pioneer. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you can, slap this video with a like. Get in the red zone with those blood-soaked champions. Share it with your friends who want to get into Pioneer, because this format is beyond sweet. Even though I got dumpstered at my Pioneer event, which is fine. Like, I had fun playing it. Definitely things I'm going to be changing and tweaking for next week, if I get the chance to play. I appreciate you guys for being here. Be on the lookout for more Pioneer and Modern deck techs, as far as possibly even some band discussions of what could be coming on next Monday for the Pioneer format, and talking about some more modern stuff, because even that format's still sweet, even if people think it's a dumpster fire. But that's going to be it for me. I'll see you guys in the next video.